Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. The website is aroundtheempire.com. This is listener-supported, independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Follow us on Twitter @aroundtheempire. And please help build up the YouTube channel by subscribing at youtube.com/aroundtheempire. Elijah Magnier returns to the show, speaks to us from Baghdad, and according to Elijah's analysis, the recent sabotage attacks in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia were a warning from Iran to the U.S. and allies in the region about what kinds of retaliation could occur if escalation continues and an attack on Iran is carried out. We also talk about his recent reporting about the prospects for a summer war in Lebanon and the wider region. Elijah Magnier is a veteran war correspondent and political analyst with over 35 years' experience covering the Middle East and North Africa. We recorded this on May 17th, 2019. Elijah Magnier just joining us from Baghdad. Hello, Elijah. Welcome back to Around the Empire. It's great to see you.
Hello, Joanne. Thank you for having me again.
So, I guess just to start off, how are things in Baghdad? I would imagine it's busy and maybe a little tense.
Well, to tell you the truth, it's very different from the situation 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago. I mean, very rarely we hear incident in Baghdad. The insurgency of ISIS is really very far. We hardly hear about it. We know it exists, but there's a traffic. People are on the street, particularly in the month of Ramadan. People stay up all night until 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's just extremely alive as a city.
Mean stay up till 4 in the morning partying and things?
Yes, going to restaurants, smoking nargile, and then you go down toward the river. It's very crowded. People are everywhere. So it's very pleasant.
Well, that's good news. That's really good news. I guess they've been through so much. They or either that, or they don't take the saber rattling and the threats of wars very seriously. Is that the case?
Well, I think they are enjoying the time of peace now after so many decades of ruthless ruling of Saddam Hussein, and then the U.S. occupation in 2003, and all the security procedures, because ISIS was everywhere on the road toward the south, toward the north. Now it's very really few incidents here and there, so that you can feel the calm and the tranquility and the security is back. That will not exclude few attacks from time to time, but it is really a good feeling to be in Iraq now. I haven't felt it like that since 2003. I lived in Iraq for more than 9 consecutive years, and then for all the rest of 5-6 years, I've been going on and off. This is completely different now.
Well, that's good. And, I guess given what they've been through, I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? They have a whole different perspective on life. Just relief, thankful for some peace. And, and I hate to even talk about this subject then, of all the saber rattling that we've heard, particularly over the past week. I mean, my gut feeling is that I don't take it seriously, that this is Bolton and Pompeo trying to, as Bolton puts it, exercise maximum pressure, as he says. And I don't really think that they could get this president to go to war with Iran, but you just never know with the extreme Uberhawk neocons, what they're capable of. However, I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but yesterday there was an editorial by Edward Luce in the Financial Times, and it was scathing, devastating, really. He says, I'll read a little bit of it to you. The title of it is "The U.S. Sets Course for Its Next Middle Eastern War of Choice." So right off the bat, that's bad. And then it gets worse. He says, Dick Cheney, the former U.S. president, said that if there was a 1% threat of something happening, America should act as if it were a certainty. By that yardstick, the chances of a U.S. war with Iran are now flashing red. Any such conflict could induce a geopolitical earthquake to exceed what followed the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. That war unleashed ISIS, empowered Russia and China, and left a bitterly divided America roughly $3 trillion worse off. He's way underestimating there. In the first Gulf War of 1991, the U.S. led a broad international coalition. By the second one, in 2003, the coalition of the willing had shrunk to Britain, Spain, Australia, Poland, and a handful of Pacific islands. This time, the U.S. would be fighting without any non-Middle Eastern allies. In the spirit of Mr. Cheney, the U.S. should bear in mind parallels between the buildup to the Iraq War in 2003 and what's happening today. Much like then, today's case is led by two highly skilled insiders, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. And then he says that they are worthy heirs to Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. They know how to marshal intelligence for their ends. Each claims that Iran is stoking its proxies in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon for imminent attacks on the U.S. and its allies. They have withdrawn non-essential U.S. personnel from Baghdad and ordered the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier and a bunch of B-52 bombers to the region. America would respond with unrelenting force to any Iranian attack, said Mr. Bolton. U.S. retaliation would be swift and decisive, says Mr. Pompeo. And then he says, all that's lacking is clear intelligence to back them up. He mentions the British Major General who came up and said, well, no, there is no increased threat in Iraq. And a little bit later on, he compares it to the Iraq War. And he says murkiness over who carried out this week's attacks on oil tankers near the Straits of Hormuz hints at a wider menu of triggers for U.S. military action. And what I think he's doing there is hinting that there might be a false flag, which is kind of shocking for I believe he's the editor of the Financial Times, to say something like that. Then he says that the Iraq War helped bring America's unipolar moment to an end. And he says that it also brought about a reemergence of great power rivalries. And then he says that a war with Iran would risk far more. He goes on about that. And at the end, he basically says the alternative path is that Donald Trump fires or sidelines Mr. Bolton and Mr. Pompeo. In that case, the drumbeat for war would fall silent. But that seems less likely by Mr. Cheney's measure. Therefore, the world should take out an insurance against America's next war of choice. I don't know what he means about insurance, but at the very least, he means that should prepare for it. It's an extremely harsh editorial where he completely, compares Trump with the Bush administration and with his administration with the worst actors in the Bush administration. And, pretty much says we are not with you. You're not going to have any allies in Europe, certainly, if you do this. So, as we know, there's a broader war going on here. Trump is trying to get Europe to follow the Iran sanctions and to completely disintegrate the Iran deal. But at the same time, we also have anonymous sources telling us that Donald Trump does not want war with Iran and that he's told his senior advisors of that and that he's willing to meet with Iran to negotiate. So I mean, that's the way things stand over here right now. There's a massive, massive pushback to this drumming up of war or threats of war with Iran. Now, you've been writing a lot lately in the past few days, in the past weeks, and I'm not sure which one if we could touch on some of those. Well, you know what, Elijah, let me just let you take this how you handle it how you want to. And I'll link all of these articles in the show notes for people to read. But give us your thoughts on this and what you've been hearing from your sources, if you would, please.
Well, first of all, I think comparing John Bolton and Mike Pompeo to Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney is a big insult to Rumsfeld and Cheney, because Rumsfeld and Cheney were much more clever than Bolton and Pompeo. Actually, yeah. Pompeo is just a follower who executes orders. He doesn't think. He goes in visiting countries and just repeat the same mantra. You don't feel any initiative that he's taking, like John Kerry or any other foreign minister or secretary or U.S. Secretary of State. Usually they are very clever and they have initiative, they have charisma, which is completely not the case, which is totally not the case of Mike Pompeo. And John Bolton is just repeating the same rhetoric that he wants to go to war. And he's obsessed about war. So I think the comparison here is very insulting to Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. However, I have from the day one never believed there is going to be a war against Iran. It's very difficult to put your neck on the line as a journalist and say, well, there's no war. Yeah, people normally in my career, they are very conservative, very cautious, and they say maybe the war is not inevitable, maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not going to happen. Well, from day one, I said it is not going to happen, and I have my reasons. First of all, Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is not Saudi Arabia. Iran is not Bahrain, is not the Emirates. Iran is Iran, and Iran has long-range missiles that the United States, despite its almighty strengths and military machine, cannot destroy over 3,600 location of missiles, anti-air missiles. Yes, I can see. I have a better connection now.
All right, so maybe we could start again from the 3,600 missiles.
Yes. So Iran has around 3,500, 3,600 missiles location to fire against any target in the Middle East, and the United States military machine cannot destroy all these locations from day one or day two or day three. They can destroy 200, 300, 400 targets per day, but that will give enough time for Iran to fire against the U.S. allies in the region and the U.S. military base in the Middle East. Therefore, I don't believe the United States and its allies are ready to take that risk, because Iran in 2019 is no longer the Iran in 1988, when during the Iran-Iraq war, it had nothing to fire back, and it was using all its military effective against Saddam Hussein. Today is completely different. Today, Iran has a precision missile. It has a supersonic missile that can hit any oil platform. And as we can see in the last week, we saw the targeting of two Saudi oil carrier and Emirati and other oil vessels that were sabotaged, and we saw the Houthi bombing, blowing up with a armed drone, the Saudi Aramco oil line that goes from the east to the west. So we see that Iran can create a lot of damage, even if Iran did not announce its responsibility. and did not claim that it was behind it. But we see that all the Iranian allies are mobilizing to support Iran if needed. Therefore, creating an atmosphere where to say there's going to be a war on Iran is wrong, because the Iranians don't read it in the same way and don't believe there's going to be war in this way. And also the leaked information that the Americans are going to send 120,000 troops to do what? To send them where? To Saudi Arabia? To send them to the Emirates? To invade Iran with it? I mean, it's completely crazy. From the military approach, that cannot be done. And some people said, well, it can occupy Khuzestan. Khuzestan is the area that is linked to Iraq, south of Iraq, Basra, and Amara. And that also is impossible. How are they going to land there? Iraq is not going to accept for the US to embark 120,000 troops on its territory, because it's going to attack it, because it is not because Iraq doesn't want to be involved in any US war. So all these scenarios are not feasible. Therefore, the war is not feasible. The war is not logical. It's not going to happen. The sanctions, yes, that is much more efficient. And Iran has responded and putting pressure on the European. And the Europeans will find a way in the next 60 days to calm down Iran and to keep it within the nuclear deal, for Iran not to have an enrichment uranium that can go toward the military grade, and not to have an excess of stock of heavy water. Therefore, I think the solution is going to be found between Europe and the Iranians, but not between the US and the Iranians. And my last point here is Donald Trump is asking the Iranians to negotiate. The Iranians don't have anything to negotiate for. They just want the US president to stand down, to accept the deal that was signed in 2015 by Barack Obama, to honor it, and then they can sit on the table, but they're never going to negotiate their missile capability. They're never going to accept to pull out, to withdraw from the Middle East, unless it's requested by countries like Syria, because this is where they are today. And they will never stop supporting all their partners and allies in the Middle East, because it is embedded in their constitution. It's an obligation they have imposed on themselves in the constitution to support all these groups and all these partners. So yes, even if Donald Trump wants to ask the Swiss mediation, he's going to give the Swiss, as he did, his phone number. That's really amusing to hear. Like the Iranians don't have the American phone number and vice versa. But nonetheless, the Iranians have nothing to offer but to sit on the table only when Donald Trump will honor the deal. That's it. Very simple.
Yeah, I mean, that was two of the things that you mentioned there were questions that I had. Number one, where are you going to deploy these 120,000 troops? We don't have these giant bases in Iraq anymore. I don't know how many we can fit in the bases that we do have. And my understanding is that we have built bases in Syria, but they're not. I mean, I think there's one of significant size near Kobani, and I think the other ones are fairly small. In Afghanistan, I'm not aware of. I really don't know anything about the western part of Afghanistan, and how much of that where we base troops or have bases. I actually don't really know much about that part of Afghanistan, and 120,000 troops that's almost as many as we deployed in Iraq, and that took months and months of preparation. So I doubt that 120K number to begin with. I think, this is only my opinion, that the New York Times, it was noticeable that they put that number in the very first paragraph of that article. And of course, that's pretty much the only thing that people grabbed onto and reacted to. And I'm glad they did, by the way. But I didn't take it seriously. And, Trump swatted that down the next day or whatever. I don't doubt that Bolton was pushing the Pentagon for modified war plans and such, and that his National Security Council wasn't making preparations or, trying to signal to everyone that they were making preparations, because I think Bolton's tactics right now are probably limited to bluster. Though I still don't trust that he couldn't, I'm afraid of something happening by accident or not by accident. And it's funny because the reaction to, well, first of all, let me just address the two things, how would they deploy 120 troops to begin with, and what do they actually want from Iran? What do they want Iran to do? I mean, I assume it all goes back to Netanyahu's demand that the Iran deal be renegotiated, involving, as you mentioned, the missile program, and withdrawing all support for all troops in Syria, and all support for allies in Lebanon and Syria, anywhere near Israel. So, as you mentioned, that's pretty much that's going nowhere. Iran already spent a lot of time negotiating the Iran deal. They were, as far as I understand, it was already a pretty generous deal by the Iranians at the time. And they have no backing, or we have no backing from our allies in Europe on this. So, yeah, I agree with everything that you said there. I do want to mention something that you brought up, the Houthi drone attack on the pipeline in Saudi Arabia. Now, the claim has been all along that while Iran supports the Houthis, they are not and could not be giving them any significant assistance in their war against the Saudis, the Saudi war against them. Has that changed? Has Iran begun to give them more support? You implied that was part of Iran's pushback or warning, that attack on that pipeline.
Well, officially, Iran denied any ties to the Houthi drone attack on the Saudi oil installation, and officially, Iran denied any link to the sabotage of the between 4 to 7 vessels, because on the news we heard 4, but effectively sources on the ground said actually the fire was covering 7 vessels, but it doesn't matter the number here. Right. That is official. Now, unofficially, we can see that, first of all, the Houthi has improved tremendously in their military hardware, and they have technology that we haven't seen before, but within Yemen, but we've seen it in the hands of Iran. And the drones in Yemen looks very much similar to the one of Iran.
I see.
Second, the time of the bombing of the oil installation that goes from the east to the west of Saudi Arabia, it coincide with the attack on the vessels in the water, in the Emirati water. So therefore, the target is the same, more or less. The objective is the same, to say if we don't export our oil, nobody's going to export the oil. And this is the example of the damage that can happen to you by whoever supports Iran, or its Iran allies, or Iran that is denying. It's very similar to when Israel attacked and Israel carried out assassination around the world, and they never claim the responsibility, and they deny it, or they say nothing. Therefore, this kind of style, we've seen it used in the Middle East. by Israel. We've seen Saudi Arabia never acknowledge all the attacks by the Yemeni against several Saudi targets, the same with the Emirates. And now they are releasing some information. So for me, I see very strong link with Iran and these two attacks. Now, yes, the Houthis have improved. They have they are more skillful in their fighting, in the guided missiles they are using against the Saudi tanks and the Saudi military armed Humvee, and we can see that all the tactics that the Yemeni are using is very good and very intelligent and very well planned. And it's obvious that the Houthi are not alone. It's obvious that they are receiving supply because there is always possibility to supply. There is never, ever a country that's fully surrounded, ever, in any conflict. I've seen that in Sarajevo. I've seen that in Beirut when the Israelis were surrounding the capital in 1982. I've seen that in many capitals. The capital is never fully surrounded. So there are always ways to smuggle men, to smuggle weapons, and to smuggle technology. And we saw that also in Gaza.
Right. Yeah. And I can see that. I mean, the Salah's military, they had missile technology, they had engineers, they had skills, and the missiles at first, I think, were modified. The big equipment were things that they had, old Soviet missiles and such, that they re-engineered and outfitted to become travel a longer distance and in other ways improved. And I mean, people I've talked to in Yemen have said it's not technically Iran support, but if they can't get guns and weapons and people through, we can still use email. They still had ways of communicating. But I can see how over time, as the war became more and more dire, just worse and worse, it looks like maybe they've gotten more support from Iran. And as you said, the drones, that's a whole different story. And it just shows how vulnerable the Saudis are. And anyway, that war is astounding in so many ways. But that's an interesting development. And I mean, you're guessing, right, that these were warnings by Iran. Well, I guess it doesn't matter whether you were guessing or not. But you spend quite a bit of time in your articles talking about that, about how Iran intends to send a message instead of, withdrawing and being completely defensive in response to these threats. They are probably carrying out some attacks of sabotage and other kinds of attacks just to remind their adversaries in the region how vulnerable they are and what kind of things could happen if they either go along with the U.S. in an attack on Iran or if they urge and encourage an attack with Iran. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, correct. So what the message behind that is we're not targeting U.S. Military base. We're not targeting U.S. personnel. We don't want the Americans to have an excuse, a valid reason to attack us. But if we attack the U.S. allies, then Trump will not have enough alibi and element to put forward to the Congress and say, I've been attacked, our soldiers are killed, and then I'm going to go to war. So the message is, yes, you want to support the U.S. in its war, you want to finance Trump's campaign, this is what you're going to get, and this is what you're going to suffer from. And because you rely heavily on oil, because Trump is blackmailing you all the time and he needs your billions, you're not going to get your billions. You're going to suffer as much as I am going to suffer. And Trump will not have the excuse to respond, to use the military personnel to come and get Iran, because the Iranians are not bombing U.S. targets.
Now, do you think that message is coming across clearly? You think
From the
that?
first moment, yes. The first moment the attack, the sabotage was carried out against the oil vessels, I said the war is over. Because this is one, we saw so far only two examples of what Iran or Iranian allies are capable of doing. Only two examples so far. I hope we don't see more examples because now the tone is coming down. Trump is saying, I don't want to go to war. He's using the Swiss to try and get them to contact the Iranians. He really didn't understand that it is not a question of giving the phone number. It's a question of what do you have to offer on the table for the Iranians to come and talk to you. And for Iran is extremely clear. They're not buying a flat here. They're not buying one of the Trump's estate properties. They are negotiating the fate of their country. They want to keep the missiles to protect themselves. They're not going to attack. They have never attacked any country. They've never taken the initiative to start an attack. And they will continue supporting the partners because they don't trust the US intentions since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, since 1979. Iran is suffering sanctions since 1979. It has increased tremendously in 2011, and they lived with it. They've learned to live with it. It's extremely severe on the local population. The Iranians are paying the heavy price, but they can live with it. They can manage, because if they give up on what Trump wants, if they respond to his 12 demands, it means Iran is going to receive a call from Donald Trump the next day and going to say, hey, you have money, I want 500 million like he did with Saudi King.
Yeah, pretty much no one trusts this administration to make any deal. It remains to be seen whether anyone's going to trust us on any deal going forward, given that a new president can come in 4 years later and blow everything up and start over again, blow everything up in terms of deals made.
Absolutely.
So that's a big problem for us.
Yeah.
That's a major problem for us.
Because the problem today is who is going to guarantee for Iran that Donald Trump is going to say, okay, I go back to the deal, and that will be the end of his second term, because he would look like the person who failed in his bras de fer against Iran. And then if he remains and insists on more sanctions, he's going to go nowhere. He's going to get a second mandate, another 4 years, and then he's going to sit on the table and say to the Iranians, okay, I'm ready and I'm going to accept the nuclear deal. And they're going to say, well, what guarantee can you offer that you are not going to revoke it again, or the one after you is not going to do the same? Well, for us to take our precautions, we will keep our missiles, we will keep our strengths, we will increase our capability, and then we can sign any deal that we're not going to attack any other country.
And the other thing that's happening, for instance, that Financial Times editorial that I read part of earlier, Edward Luce is no fan of Donald Trump, right? So he's been very vocal about how much against Trump he is. So what we saw in that editorial, it was a very deliberate, scathing attack and invoking Cheney, invoking Rumsfeld, because unlike what conventional wisdom says, I don't know about the rest of the world, but the conventional wisdom here is that after 6 months, Americans forget everything and you can just fool them again. But as I've said for a long time, nobody has forgotten the war in Iraq. No one has forgotten the invasion of Iraq here. And the idea that Americans don't care about foreign policy is also not true anymore. And so, what he was definitely doing there was trying to stir up the kind of reaction that the population here had against when Obama tried to do a military intervention in Syria in 2013. As Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson has said, and just said again very recently, that he was on Capitol Hill that day when John Kerry was going around trying to summon up support for, for bombing Syria. Said that the Capitol Hill was flooded with phone calls, with people visiting in person, with emails, with faxes, with just the whole country saying, no, hell no, no, no more, not another invasion, not another intervention in the Middle East. The country was vehemently against it. And I think that that's exactly what Edward Luce was trying to do with his editorial, and that's what the New York Times is trying to do with the 120,000 troops article in the first paragraph there, which is, a lot of people only read the headlines or the first few paragraphs. So they wanted to be sure that people saw that. And, I think that there's evidence that they have triggered that kind of reaction. The day after or the day of the ship attacks in the UAE, so some of the major news networks here were reporting that. And there was a tweet from CBS, I believe it was. I pointed it out on my timeline on Twitter, saying something like that Iran was suspected of carrying out these attacks. And the response to that tweet is very significant, indicative of, first of all, people were very angry, just lashing out, saying, no, we're not going to war with Iran. But the other thing that was surprising was how many people doubted. They thought it was a false flag. They thought it was a staged attack, that we were blaming Iran when Iran didn't really do it, which makes your theory all the more interesting, Elijah, if they really did do it. It almost says that, even if Iran attacks, people aren't going to believe it. They're going to think that Bolton set it up, which is a really bad position to be in for us. The anti-interventionist sentiment in this country is still strong. And because we were lied into the war in Iraq and no one has forgotten it, you're unlikely to be able to, other than a significant attack, either on the homeland here or on our troops in the Middle East, no one's really going to believe the stories of an attack. So it's almost like a double jeopardy for us, It's just such a bad position to be in. I don't know if this is evident to people in Iraq and in the Middle East or not. I suspect that they are much more aware of what's going on here than we are of what's going on there.
Well, yes, because they suffer the consequences of the U.S. administration foreign policy. If you look at the policy in Syria, Donald Trump said, I'm going to pull out, and then he said no. They're still closing the borders between Syria and Iraq, preventing the commerce to return. They're putting pressure on Jordan to do the same. They're preventing all the Arab countries to return to Syria because they want to cripple the Syrian economy, and that means crippling the population. They stop oil to go to Syria, and it is people who are suffering from the lack of gasoline, that the transport is very slim, and that increases the burden on the prices because people need to transport the food and transport the everything else, and that crippled the economy of the country. Doesn't cripple President Assad himself. They did the same in Iraq, where they in 2011 we heard General Mike Flynn. He said we saw ISIS going and we didn't do anything about it because the administration didn't want to do anything about it. And
John Kerry admitted to that too.
Yes,
a tape that was leaked. Yeah,
absolutely. And then we see in 2014 ISIS going to occupying a third of Iraq, going to Erbil and Baghdad, and the U.S. administration decided not to do anything. And I quote here Masoud Barzani, the Kurdish leader, who said it was Iran who came to support us and gave us weapons and advisor. Otherwise, Erbil would have fallen. And it's exactly the same with Baghdad. I was there at the time when ISIS was moving around in Iraq in 2014. So, and then we see in Syria on the first social media accusation of chemical bombs against the rebels, particularly the moderate Al-Qaeda rebels. Then we see Donald Trump saying, when I'm eating a chocolate cake, I ordered the launching of 59 Tomahawk against Syria. And to do what? I mean, 59 Tomahawk cost millions of dollars to do what? Just to a kind of a theater, really. And at the end of the day, you see the U.S. forces are still in Syria, U.S. forces are still in Iraq, and they're doing what? Why they would remain there? And then we see Donald Trump offering Jerusalem to Netanyahu. This is not his to offer. And he's offering the Syrian Golan Heights to prevent Assad ever from negotiating with Israel, when he was already telling John Kerry in 2010, before the war imposed on Syria, that he wants to negotiate. And his father did negotiate before him to exchange peace for land. So therefore, all this mishmash of U.S. administration foreign policy that only increasing the insecurity in the Middle East, particularly in the world in generally. I'm not going to go to Venezuela now, but I will stay in the Middle East. And we see the same in Iran. He's not doing he only supporting the Iranian radical line when he is proving once again that the Granatullah Imam Khamenei is right to say we don't trust the Americans, and the pragmatic President Rouhani is wrong when he said we are going to go and talk to the Americans because we trust the Americans are honest and they want to strike a deal with us. And Khamenei said, okay, you go and try, but I'm warning you, you can't trust this administration. And he was right at the end of the day. And now Rouhani is saying we can release some prisoner, exchange prisoners, and Khamenei said no exchanges, no conversation, no dialogue, no negotiation. We can't talk to this administration. And he's showing that, again, he is right by saying that, because it is Donald Trump who's doubling down and saying, I don't want to go to war. So tell me, Joanne, how Donald Trump is looking in the eyes of his Middle Eastern allies, from whom he's sucking billions of dollars under the title of protecting them from Iran, when he is saying to Iran, I don't want to attack you, I can't go to war against you, but he's saying to the Arab countries, I want your money and you need to buy with hundreds of billions of dollars weapons from me, because you have Iran to fear from, but I cannot attack Iran, you cannot attack Iran. So what the hell are you going to do with all these weapons? Trump is using the Middle Eastern money for the Middle Eastern to fight other Middle Eastern countries. With the money invested on buying weapons by Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, every single country in the Middle East, the weapons that they are buying, the money they are giving to the United States to buy weapons, it is sufficient to reconstruct the whole Middle East, to offer social security, medical service, build university, give job employment, even to Africa, to Egypt, to Libya, to all the countries around. If they just stop buying weapons and the American administration stop thinking that everything I am constructing here, I'm going to sell it to the Middle East and going to think about how I am going to trigger a war so they can use it and buy more weapons, because I'm producing more weapons and the technology is advancing and they need to buy more weapons from me.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about that aspect of it, Elijah. So, you know, not only does Iran send a message to its adversaries in the region that they're vulnerable, that Iran can still attack them, you know, to make them back down on this whole idea of attacking Iran. It also makes them doubt that the U.S. can protect them, which is supposedly the whole reason why we're there. We're there to give safety and protection to the Gulf countries and Israel. That's the underlying reason, supposedly. And yeah, the whole idea of these weapons that they've bought are not protecting them either, thinking about the alternative ways they could spend that money. Yeah, I mean, this is a big problem for us. I mean, I do want to think that there is a way for Iran to offer something to Trump as a face-saving deal so that they could reinstate our place in the Iran deal and sort of go back to where we started. But I'm not optimistic about that, and I can see how Iran is justified in saying we don't have anything to negotiate, but it may be in their best interest, which it sounds like that's what Rouhani was trying to do. Give him some kind of face-saving deal, prisoner exchange or such. But I don't see any way out of this for us other than to back down, and
Well,
it's not in our nature to back down.
can you give me one reason why? Can you think of one reason why the Iranians would save Donald Trump? Will bring him down the tree that he's climbing on.
Well, I mean, the only reason they would have is what I'm thinking is I don't want a war. Nobody wants a war other than John Bolton, as far as I can tell. So, I'm just still I don't trust them. I do think they're bluffing to a certain extent, but I think they're crazy enough to try to trigger some kind of an attack. I still find it hard to believe they want to trigger an all-out war in the region. But I just because I have so little faith in the people who Trump has surrounded himself with, I'm hoping that Iran can offer him some kind of a face-saving deal so that we can, like you said, climb down this escalation ladder. But I mean, Trump is trying to climb down it himself, clearly, right? He's sending out a pretty clear message. I don't want a war with Iran because, let's talk about the political aspect of this, right? The 2016 election never ended here. It just blended into the 2018 election and now the 2020 election. And sort of that's all obvious, but it did calm down. There are periods of time while we have perpetual elections here. There's a period of time when it's all election and nothing else. It's just intense election season. And we are approaching that right now. We're getting into, even though it's still, almost 18 months away, we're getting into full on campaign mode here. So somehow, the people who oppose Trump are huge war hawks themselves, right? But they now have gotten a lot smarter and they are now taking the anti-war position, and they've turned his anti-interventionist stance against him now. They're finally attacking him from the left instead of from the right, which is what they've been doing for more than 2 years now. And this is going to damage him, seriously damage him. He had a strong anti-interventionist campaign stance. Whether or not we can believe that was sincere or not, I think some of it at least was, and it was effective. So now they are mobilizing US media and European media to, have the world believe that Trump is going to start a war with Iran and that could escalate into a world war, and that's going to be effective. So not only does he have the geopolitical problems, he's now got a domestic political problem, a big one at home. And that's another reason why I really don't think it's going to be very difficult to draw him into a bigger war. The question is he serious about wanting to negotiate? It seems like he is. I don't know. And, can he follow through on that? Or can he just kind of try to make this whole thing go away? Because I think it was Trita Parsi. It was someone on Twitter who watches the media in the Middle East. They made a comment on Twitter that said something like, just the other day, they said, this morning the Saudi media was triumphant and, all very happy because it looked like the United States was going to attack Iran. And by the end of the day, they were, very disappointed and, sad. So that implied that the Saudis really do want the U.S. to engage in a real war with Iran, or at the very least, a significant attack. So if you have the Saudis and presumably the Israeli war hawks as well, really trying to push us into some kind of significant attack or a war, actual war, what happens to them? It seems like there is some of this depends on them changing their minds that it would be a bad idea for that to happen.
Well, the Israelis said today that Trump is looking very weak and Iran is looking very strong because Trump doesn't want to go to war. And the Saudis are sending a double message. First, they're saying to the American administration, well, you saying you want to protect us, and you are saying that we need to buy all these weapons because Iran is a danger, and you're not attacking Iran. And even if Iran is attacking our oil production, that goes straight to the United States of America, even because one of the vessels that was attacked, the Saudi, was about to sail to the United States to deliver 2.2 million barrels of oil. Therefore, the Saudis are saying, well, you have to attack Iran because you said you want to attack Iran and because they are attacking the oil supply. And this is what you said you're going to do in case of danger. And they're also saying, if you're not going to attack Iran, so why you are blackmailing us? Why you are bullying us? Why you want all our billions? Why you call us and you say, I want millions because I am protecting you. Protecting us from what? You're protecting us, and Iran managed to sabotage, Iran allies or whoever did it in the benefit of Iran. So the vessels were sabotaged, and the drones attacked the oil supply of Saudi Arabia, the Aramco Saudi company that transport oil from the east to the west and from the west to the east. So what are you going to do about it? Why you are asking us to pay all this money doing nothing? So at the end of the day, I don't think the Saudis want to go to war with Iran, because going to war with Iran, it means Saudi Arabia is going to be the first to pay the price. And the Saudi are much more vulnerable than the Iranians in case of war. And the problem the problem is the same for the Emirates. It's going to be because the Emirates are going to be attacked as well. So therefore, I don't think the Saudis want to go to this kind of war. They want perhaps the Americans to come and bomb a few Iranian facility, but it doesn't happen like this. It's not the way it works. If you bomb Iranian military facility, the Iranians are going to retaliate, and they're going to retaliate against your allies, against Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and the Bahrain. So these are their favorite targets. And if you keep your forces away, they can also target the countries. This is what they said, and this is what I've written in my articles. They're going to attack the countries where the Americans are going to use as a base to attack Iran. So, for example, if they use Qatar and the El Adid military base, U.S. military base in Qatar is used to bomb Iran, the Iranians are going to bomb Qatar. If they do the same with Saudi Arabia is going to be bombarded. So these are the rule of the game. One of the rule of the game and the rule of engagement that the Iranians are going to use. So the reaction of Iran is not contained, is not imagined, is not studied, and can go beyond that. And if Iran is under real threat, real danger, then I can guarantee to you that all Iranian partners are going to be engaged in this war because they're not going to survive without Iran. And because Iran has been financing these partners, supporting them, making them strong for the last 30, 40 years, it is time for these allies and partners to stand next to Iran. They're not going to allow Iran to fall.
Well, I mean, here's a silly question. Well, then why don't the Saudis and the Israelis negotiate with Iran?
Because if let's start with the Israelis. If the Israelis look for peace, then the problems of the most of the problems of the Middle East are over. The Palestinians signed the Oslo Agreement, and they've got nothing in exchange. On the contrary, Netanyahu is expanding the settlement, and he's taking Jerusalem, and he wants to take the West Bank, Zone C, and he wants the refugees in Gaza to leave and want to give them an area in Egypt. So he's trying to grab more territory and kick out the original inhabitant, that the Palestinians. He doesn't want to live with the Palestinians. He doesn't want the two states to exist in Palestine. He doesn't want Palestine. He doesn't want Israel and Palestine. He wants only Israel. So, and if he does that, then there is no more reason for Israel to seek financial and military support from the United States. Because if they are not in a state of war, then there's no reason for Hezbollah to continue existing. There's no reason for Iran to continue hammering verbally Israel and supporting all the anti-Israeli non-state actors in the region. There is no reason for Syria to be in bad terms with Israel if Israel is ready for peace and to give back the Golan Heights to Syria. Israel doesn't want peace. That's obvious.
Yeah, well, peace is a dirty word here too because of war profiteering. That's probably, if not our most important problem, it's one of our most important problems. Now, do you have a little more time? I want to talk to you about one more thing if we can.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the article that I have to say, it also gave me great relief to read this article because earlier you had reported that basically there were preparations for a war this summer in Lebanon.
Yes.
And that scared the heck out of me, by the way, and a lot of people, I'm sure. But you reported, let me find that article here. On the 13th of May, you say from, I'm going to pronounce these wrong, I'm sure, from Karbala to Al-Fujara. How do you pronounce those? I'm sorry.
Yes, from Karbala to Fujairah.
Fujara, Al-Fujara, Karbala to Al-Fujara. An act of sabotage may end prospects of a summer war in the Middle East. And so you got involved in some controversy, I guess about a month ago, maybe, where, well, I'll let you tell the story. I'll let you tell the story if you don't want to talk about this, Elijah. That's fine with me.
Not at all.
Mind.
On the contrary. So
okay.
The first article was a quote from a meeting that took place among Hezbollah commanders, and that was the assessment of Hezbollah that the war is going to happen in the summer. And it was not my opinion, it was just a reporting. And that report, 20 days before that, a very well-known Middle Eastern journalist, Abdel Bari Atwan, who is a Palestinian. He's quite honest, trustworthy, and famous in the Middle East. He went to Lebanon and was invited by the president, Michel Aoun, and then he saw one of Hezbollah MPs, Nawaf al-Musawi, with whom he sat for several hours along with one journalist from Al Mayadeen, and then Nawaf Musawi, who is a Hezbollah MP, told him that he had a meeting with Sayyid Nasrallah for 5 hours, and Nasrallah said there's going to be war in the summer. And Abdul Bari Atwan wrote that in his publication, electronic publication, Ar-Ray al-Yawm, and he published the article, and he said, this person, and he quoted the name, said, Nasrallah said there is going to be a war in the summer. Hezbollah the next day denied that and said that's the opinion of the source, and it is not our opinion. And Hezbollah is free to deny, because that is a policy that they can take upon for their own reason. Now, 20 days later, I received the same confirmation from 4 sources who were present at the meeting, and who all 4 told me this exactly the same thing, exactly as I have written in my report. And the reaction to that report was excessive. First of all, the anti-Hezbollah current or media or politician in Lebanon said Hezbollah wants to go to war in this summer and is going to spoil the tourism season. And this is what Nasrallah himself came out and confirmed. He said, bad timing because we're coming to the summer. Nasrallah never said the meeting didn't take place. That's one. 2, Nasrallah spent from minute 30 second to minute 55:20 to deny one. The Hezbollah media could have issued just a simple denial statement, as they did with the publication 20 days before. And then if you listen to Nasrallah's speech between the minute 40:30 and 55:20, you hear him saying, the report is wrong. This is not what I said. I didn't say they're going to kill the first line of command, the second line of command. So he has exaggerated, because I never said the second line of command. 3, he said the military think otherwise. So he didn't deny that the military said there is going to be a war. And then Nasrallah himself, the week after, came out and launched his threat to Israel. And he said, in case of war, I'm going to destroy all your army. So basically, Nasrallah said he denied the report, but he didn't deny the report. And when I say I stand by it, because I am confident my sources are truthful, and Nasrallah has his own reason to deny any report he wants, but it doesn't mean that this didn't happen. However, I never adopted Nasrallah's idea, because this is what he said, but that doesn't mean that I agree with him. And when I said from Karbala to Fujairah, an act of sabotage may end the prospect of a summer war in the Middle East, is because the sabotage on Fujairah gave a very clear hint to what the war can in the Middle East can produce. And in my point of view, that I did not explain, because I can't write a lot, otherwise people can't read long articles. It's exactly the same attack that was carried out against oil vessels in Al-Fujairah. Hezbollah has the capability with the Yakhont missiles that are supplied by Russia to Syria, and that Syria supplied it to Hezbollah, and Iran has an equivalent of these missiles, even more modern today, that have been supplied to Hezbollah, and they can destroy oil platform. Now oil is becoming very precious, more precious than before, because in every country there is an economical problem today, and the financial crisis that the world is observing is valid for every single country in the Middle East. Therefore, the attack on 2 oil vessels, it's an example of what any war in the future can do, and how it hurts to see a pipeline that is destroyed and oil vessels that is sabotaged can do, and the effect that these attacks can do on the countries of the Middle East and the rest of the world, to wake up and say, we don't want war. And today Israel is involved in oil drilling, in improving its economy. They're trying to sell this oil and gas to Europe, but it's not going to happen because the connection between Israel and Europe through Greece is extremely expensive. It's not only 7 billion, but it's going to 15 billion. We're going to another subject, but just to tell you that for Israel, it's very precious to protect its oil, and Hezbollah knows that the Israeli oil platform are going to be the first target to hit. The Haifa harbor is going to be the first to be hit, and I don't think Israel would go to war in this case, whatever the reasons are. We saw a microscopic example in Al Fujairah and with the drone on Saudi Arabia. If that happened, if a war happened in Lebanon, we're going to see it on a wider scale. And I don't believe Israel is going to go through that.
Mm-hmm. So the more involved in oil production and transportation Israel becomes, the more vulnerable they are. And you're saying that they have the Haifa port. When you say their oil production and the pipeline, are you talking about their drilling in the Eastern Med and the pipeline they're building from Israel to Greece? I
Yes,
thought they already start. Yeah. So they already started that pipeline, didn't they?
Well, no, they need investment, and Europe is not going to invest because they're saying the oil and gas we are receiving is much cheaper.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why would we pay a more expensive gas supply and oil supply from Israel when we can get it cheaper from Russia through Turkey or from any other source?
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah,
but
that is a
it's
whole
also
nother
valid for
subject.
Lebanon. And Lebanon also is going to join the oil club. So it's also Lebanon has its reason not to be involved in war. But Lebanon never declared war on Israel. So Lebanon, well, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Lebanon reacted to Hezbollah aggression and violation of its sovereignty. Therefore, yes, Lebanon is afraid of losing its oil, will be more afraid of losing its oil platform. But Israel also is afraid, it will be very afraid of losing its oil platform. That's why I think the war in the Middle East is over.
Well, I hope you're right. And so basically, the solution is for the aggressors, if you correctly identify the aggressors, which we don't like to do. We like to say that everyone else is the aggressor. But if everybody just chills, yeah, we can avoid a war. Seems simple, Elijah.
Yeah.
Seems simple.
Well, it's simple if there is a will of peace. There is no will of peace. It doesn't suit the U.S. administration. It doesn't suit Israel. It doesn't suit Saudi Arabia. If Israel goes to peace, then there is no more. Israel will no longer be in need of all these support from the United States and to build up its military apparatus. They need to build up their economy and to build up a good ties with all the countries around it by saying, okay, I exchange peace for land, and then we all live in peace. It doesn't suit Israel. The government of Israel is not made like that. It is a government, it's an army with a small government. And we can see all the members of the cabinet, they most of the time ex-military and ex-chief of staff, and people who think how they can defend themselves against an imaginary enemy they are going to feed and they are going to create, and then they train all the time on warlike scenarios, and they just need not to declare war.
Right. Well, there's another big thing that has to happen, and that's that the American empire and our imperial partners have to decide that it's over. We're not the sole superpower anymore. We need to pull back and concentrate on our own problems for a while and start getting along with people instead of pushing everyone around. And the question remains as to whether we're willing to do that. So there's that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I've kept you a long time. There's at least two other big things I'm dying to talk to you about. Three, really. I want to talk to you about Syria. I want to talk to you about Idlib. I want to talk to you about Libya and Turkey, but we don't have enough time for that today. So maybe we can get together again soon. I know you're a busy man right now in Iraq. I also wanted to talk to you about Iraq, but people are going to have to read your articles for that.
Okay. Well, anytime. I'm easy, Joanne.
Tell everyone where to find your work and how to support your work, please.
Well, I have a blog, and this is where people can support my work, and they can donate for the work I do. I work a lot. I try to send the message in different languages. I'm grateful for all the people supporting me, particularly the translators and the proofreaders who are working on the same intensity as I do, and they also trying to spread the content of the article to a wider audience, and I'm extremely grateful for them and extremely grateful for people who can donate to support the work. And they can find me on Twitter, they can read the blog, and I'm proceeding with this job. I'm not stopping.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. All right. Well, hopefully we can get together again soon to talk about at least one of those other things. Maybe Idlib is the next big one. I'm endlessly curious about Turkey too. It's just such a complicating factor, but hopefully we can do that again real soon.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Take care, Elijah.
Thank you, Joanne. All the best.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Elijah Magnier. Follow Elijah on Twitter at EJMAlrai, EJMALRAI. Read and support his work at ejmagnier.com. Around the Empire's listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Thanks so much to longtime patrons and new patrons, contributors, and also to everyone who messages me with suggestions and feedback. And that really does make a difference, and I appreciate it. The audio podcast is the main focus here, where we have the most traffic from all over the world, actually, and there are many ways to listen to it. Find it, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, or listen to it on the website, aroundtheempire.com, or on patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or on YouTube, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. If you're listening on YouTube, hit the thumbs up to like the video. Leave me a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. Working on new look, new kinds of contents. We're still working on that, and I'd really like your help to build up that YouTube channel. And we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.